this morning, I wanted to talk about choosing courage. I think everybody in this room, in some way, shape or form, is creative either within themselves or in the work that they do. And when I think about courage, and I think about putting our creativity out into the world, you need a bit of that. You need a bit of courage because it's risky. People are going to see stuff that you've potentially poured your heart and soul into, and we don't know how they're going to respond. And so my talk today is going to be about choosing courage and a little bit about why I choose it as well. But before I get into that, I just wanted to introduce you to this kid here. And she has wild curly hair. She's creative, she's curious, and she is courageous. That little kid, if you have not figured out, is me. I think I was about 2, maybe 3 in that photo. And I've been asking my dad a lot lately, what was I like as a little kid? And he says to me that I asked a lot of questions, but often my questions were quite hard. Sometimes I'd ask him questions and he'd say, I just didn't know what to say to you. And I said, well, what do you mean? Give me an example. And he said, well, there was this one time when you came home from school and you just had these people come in and talk about making the school smoke free. And you came home and you said, Dad, why do you smoke if it's not good for your health? And Dad said, well, I'm addicted. And I said, but why are you addicted for? And he said, well, I just started one day and then I couldn't stop, and then before you knew it, I was addicted. And I said to him, but why would you want to put that in your body in the first place? And my dad couldn't answer me. And he said, you used to ask these questions of me and I would just get to a point where I couldn't give you an answer. And that was very normal. He also said to me, I love to learn and I love to read. And there came a point where it was super annoying because I wanted my parents to read everything to me. And there's this running joke in my family about how at about 3 years old, I knew how to say the word polyunsaturated. I was supposed to Google it, so I knew what it meant today when I got here and I didn't, so I don't know. But the reason that I knew it is when I say I wanted them to read everything, I learned this word from the packaging of like a margarine container. And so my parents kind of got sick of this, and so what they started to do was buy me books that didn't have any words in them. They were completely illustrated, and what that meant for me was, as a little girl, at bedtime I was the storyteller. You had to sit there and listen to me make up stories, these big, beautiful, bold visions and stories about the characters and everything that I saw in the pictures. Now, not much has changed since then. I still have that wild curly hair. I'm still very creative. I'm still really comfortable asking some of those hard questions and really comfortable to stand here and say that I'm quite courageous as well. Probably the only difference is now when I ask those questions, it's always centered around how can we create a positive and meaningful change for people. I still have those big stories and visions and ideas that I create as well, but there's this added layer of what is the stuff that I need to do to now make that a reality? And how can I do that in a way that is actually meaningful and purposeful for the people that I'm creating this for? So what that looks like for me today is running Prepair. When I think about Prepair, I know that it's an organisation that just honestly has my heart. I founded it 2 years ago. And if I think about what Prepair is for me, it is like the older sister that I needed when I was younger to help me navigate relationships, emotional abuse, and self-love. And that's exactly what we do today. Through a myriad of different ways, we use social media, online resources, workshops, and talks to deliver that. Now, because I didn't have Prepair growing up, what that meant for me was at 19 years old, I had no idea what self-love was. I didn't know why it was important. I didn't know how to get it. I didn't know what that might do for my relationships. had no idea what a healthy relationship really looked like. And it also meant that I spent about 4 years of my life in a relationship where I was emotionally abused. And I didn't know it. I didn't know that it was happening to me. Emotional abuse is like a pattern of behaviours, a pattern of abuse that targets your emotions to gain control over you. It starts to chip away at your self-worth. It chips away at your confidence, your belief in yourself, and that's exactly what happened to me. The other thing that emotional abuse does, if it's left alone, nothing's done about it, is it grows. It festers, it evolves, and it can actually become quite dangerous. It can result in physical abuse. And in the 4th year of this relationship, that's exactly what happened to me. So because I didn't have Prepair, I was unable to identify for that 4 years of the relationship that some of that stuff that I was putting up with was actually unacceptable. It was not okay. And so when things turned physical, that was kind of like the catalyst for me to get out and to leave this relationship, and I did that. And I fast forward about a year later, and at this time I'm in Rarotonga, and I'm hanging out on this island alone, and I read this article on Facebook that teaches me about emotional abuse. And that was kind of like my first ever educational experience about the issue. It was the first time that I realised the seriousness of what happened to me. It was the first time that I realised that one act of physical abuse that happened on a drunken night was not the only form of abuse that I had experienced. And so finally I'd found some language to wrap around this thing that I'd put up with and didn't really know how to talk about. And I'll never forget sitting on this island and kind of having like an undeniable feeling that because I had learned this, I had to do something about it. I just knew it. I also knew that I had a voice, and something in me had always told me that my voice would be used for something one day. I just didn't know what, and I didn't know how until that moment. I knew that my voice could be used to tell my story and to use this as a way to educate my own generation and perhaps the generations to come. But the thing that got me the most was the realization when I sat there that actually I'm a woman who has like a long line of saturation of domestic violence amongst my ancestors. And so if I was to use my voice to speak about this thing that we don't often talk about and to be an advocate for change, that perhaps I could use that to help rewrite some of that history as well. And so I'm sitting there on this island and I'm thinking, holy heck, this is big and I can't deny what I'm feeling. I've got to do the thing. And I don't really know how to do it, and I don't know how to start either. It's going to take a lot of courage. But the truth is, I didn't have the courage to get started straight away. I was so scared about it. Who would I be to get up and talk about my story when there's people out there experiencing things that are way worse than what I did? How could I stand up there and share that when I hadn't even sat down yet and faced into the conversation with my mum and dad to tell them what really happened and why I really moved home? How could I do that without knowing how people were going to react? My colleagues, the friends that I lost while I was in that relationship, my ex-partner. There were so many what ifs in there, and what that meant was for about 2 or 3 years, I did nothing. I did nothing about it. I just didn't have the courage to do it. Fast forward that 2 or 3 years, and things did get started. Why? Nothing amazing. I honestly just had a shitty day at work. I was a bank manager at the time. A core part of my role was to coach people to sell home loans and life insurance. And I came home from work one day and I was just like, what am I doing? I do not want to look back on my life and think, all I ever did was climb a corporate ladder, like, yay me. That wasn't enough. And so I sat down and I started to think about it, and I was like, well, what would I do? Then I remembered that time on the island, and I was like, shit, I'm going to have to do the thing. So I needed a little bit of courage. What's courage? It is the choice to face into anything that might be hard, might be a little bit awkward, might cause some pain, might have some sort of adverse consequence to it, but you do it instead of giving up. So I started by calling up my dad and saying, hey Dad, I need to talk to you about why I really moved home. And I was freaking out because I have to face something that was actually quite painful for me. But the thing that got me the most was, how might this feel for my dad to hear? You know, I didn't want him to think it was his fault that it happened. But I had the conversation anyway, and what he showed me was love and compassion instead. I told him about this thing that I wanted to start, and he said, go on, bub, just do it. So I thought, okay, all right, maybe I will. And I went home that night and I said to my partner, I kind of want to start this thing. I'm really inspired by it. What do you think? And he said, why not? And I was like, okay, maybe I will. So I got to work the next day and I told my boss about it, and she gave me a hug, and I was like, all right, that's it. These guys think I can do it. I'm going to get started. And so Prepair started on Christmas Eve 2015. It was a blog and it was an Instagram account. I had no idea what I was doing. My point of resource to learn how to start Prepair was reading blog posts that I found on Pinterest. I literally had no idea. I started to think, well, what do I need to do? And I was like, I know, I need to buy a camera. And so I went out and spent like $1,500 on a camera. I still don't know how to use it. I went on to, do you guys know Canva? I went on there and I made a mood board. And I rang up my friend, and she's pretty creative, and I got her to create a logo for me in exchange for a bottle of wine. So that's how Prepair started. And I put these blog posts out there talking about my experience, and I posted stuff up on Instagram, and then got to this point where it was kind of like, well, what am I going to do next? And so my brain is always like, think big, go for the big visionary story. What would be awesome? And I was like, I know, I am going to go and speak to someone in Parliament about my idea. So 2 months later, I'm sitting in the beehive waiting to speak to the domestic violence spokesperson for New Zealand. I have no idea what I'm going to be asking her. I've got no call to action or agenda. I'm just going to tell her about this thing that I want to do. And I laugh at it today because I rocked up with this A4 page that was basically like an on-brand, aesthetically pleasing page of domestic violence statistics to give to the domestic violence spokesperson for New Zealand. I don't know what I was thinking. And a business card, which I'd made my friend create for me 3 days before. I'd ordered on, what was it called? Vistaprint. I obviously didn't know that the big picture existed then. And Vistaprint delivered, and I got it that morning, and I rocked up with my statistics and my business card, and I sat down with this woman and I told her about my vision and idea. And not much eventuated from that at all. But she said this one thing. It was a Friday, and she goes to me, Irene, this is the best meeting that I've had this week. And I was like, oh, cool. Okay, cool. That's awesome. Maybe I'll just keep going then. And so I did, and I got into this spiral of creativity. For months on end, my apartment walls were covered in Post-it notes. I had chalk markers all over the windows. I was designing our program. I was coming up with what was our brand story going to be? What was our mission? What were our values? What did I want to do? And I just started creating. And then I began to set some pretty big, hefty goals. And one of them was, in 5 years' time, I'm going to speak at TEDx. And another one was, I want this organisation to be so well known that one day we get to partner with like a really cool company that young women love. And so I put these goals into a book and just carried on. Honestly, a year after writing that stuff down, I was on the TEDx stage about to deliver my story. And some of you might have been there in the room that day, and I've watched it once, and I know that I look like I'm really composed, and maybe you wondered how the heck I did it. I don't actually know. I don't know, because in here was just rattling. Why? I'd never exposed my story so much before, let alone to a room of over 1,000 people and whoever was watching on the TV as well. But a big part of it was the piece around the adverse consequence. Honestly, all I could think was, holy heck, Brené Brown did a TEDx talk and she ended up on Oprah. Like, if I do this, what are the consequences? And truth be told, I still don't know to this day if my ex-partner knows about the work that I'm doing. And I thought, God, if I'm going to get up on the TEDx stage and do this, like maybe this is the thing. And I didn't know if that meant I was going to face into a hard conversation, so I was really scared. And then I did it, and it was amazing. And the feedback that came back was just like I said earlier. People were able to see themselves or somebody that they loved in my story, which was awesome. I didn't know what was going to happen 4 months later, but 4 months later I was here hosting a launch party because Prepair had partnered with Glassons to run a campaign and to sell rose t-shirts, and I've seen a few of them today already amongst the crowd, so thank you for wearing those. But even that in itself, I look at that and think that took an element of courage. I mean, we had the audacity to ask Glassons to partner with us, and we weren't even 2 years old. We designed our campaign and our t-shirts in 10 weeks. We didn't even go and meet Glassons. We sent them a pitch in a box and just waited to see what happened, and they came back and they said yes. It was friggin' crazy. And I'm probably saying all these things, and you might be like, yeah, Irene, okay, you're courageous, cool, awesome, but how do I get the stuff, how do I get it for myself? I guess that's what I really wanted to talk about today. I think we get stuck in thinking that the opposite of courage is something that it's actually not. So I wanted to say to you that the opposite of courage is not weakness. It's not. Was I weak for not starting Prepair for 2 or 3 years? No, that was not a sign of weakness. What I was I was discouraged. Discouragement is the prevention of courage. When I think about courage for myself, it is just as much a choice as it is an expectation. Why? Because of some of this stuff here. I can choose to be discouraged as well. And when I choose that, I create less certainty for myself. I choose not to be inspired. I choose not to be optimistic about what I could potentially succeed at. I choose to lose belief in myself, determination. I choose to not choose joy, to not choose a spirit of hope. And so when I say to you that courage is just as much a choice as it is an expectation, it's because I expect myself to live a life that gives me some of this stuff. I believe this stuff creates a space where creativity is born. If I'm not inspired, it's very hard to be creative. If I don't have belief in myself, it's very hard for myself to put my work out there, right? I have to choose this every single day, every single time something hard turns up. And my journey of Prepair has been constant choices between courage and discouragement. I've just chosen to face into the hard thing and anchored myself in that. Standing on TEDx couldn't be about my fears. It had to be about the spirit of hope that I might impart to somebody in that audience instead. Having the audacity to send a box to the CEO of Glassons Hallenstein to say, hey, partner with my charity. Doing that, I had to have an element of self-belief. I had to inspire my team. I mean, this is a team of volunteers, some who didn't even know me, and I said, we're going to do this. And they're like, what? What are you thinking? But I've had to have an element of this. So choosing courage, I guess what I'm saying, is a choice. It's not this big, amazing thing that's only available to some. Courage doesn't give a shit what your background is like. Doesn't care whether your idea is good enough or not. Courage just needs you to make the call, to make the decision. And you know, there are some times when I don't have some of this stuff. We all have them, creative blocks, can't find the inspiration, got to get my slides through to Elise by a certain time, still don't know what they're going to look like, creative blocks. So you figure out who you're doing it for. And so sometimes I have to remember that Prepair is about them. It's about using my story and having the courage to stand up and do what I do, because I want to do something that's meaningful and purposeful for them. Not only do I want to come up and create the big, beautiful, bright stories and visions, but I want to help them get there. Sometimes it's about her. That little girl who used to ask her dad all the hard questions. The girl who used to make up the stories in the illustrated books. It's about her and where she came from. And the long line of women behind her who too once experienced some form of abuse or relationship violence. I do it for her. So, courage is facing into the hard stuff. Might be painful, might have some adverse consequences. The opposite of courage is not weakness. The opposite of courage is discouragement. And that is a choice too. So I'm just going to leave you with the question. With wherever you're at right now, whatever it is that you're working on, personally, in business, creatively, what are you going to choose? Thank you.